unusual for people who are as independent as we both are. I mean,
All screwed up from, 100 years of smoking, and I had pneumonia 4 or 5 times. So at 91 years old, Willie Nelson sits beneath the Texas sky that once carried his songs across the world. His voice, softer now, still holds the honesty, pain, and love that made him an icon. But this time, his words sound different, carrying a stillness that feels final. After decades of relentless touring, thousands of songs, and millions of miles, Willie has said something that stunned fans everywhere. The country legend revealed that he's ready to say goodbye. It wasn't about fame or fatigue or even failing health. It was about something deeper, something that had been whispering to him for years, urging him to finally rest. Before the world knew his name, Willie Hugh Nelson was a barefoot boy from Abbott, Texas. Born during the Great Depression, his life began in hardship. Raised by his grandparents, he grew up surrounded by gospel hymns and the hum of old farm machinery. Music became his first comfort, his refuge, and his promise that even in hard times, beauty could still be found. By 6 years old, Willie had written his first song. By 10, he was performing in dance halls to help his family make ends meet. Those smoky rooms filled with laughter and struggle became his classroom. He learned that songs could do more than entertain. They could heal. Every note he played back then carried a piece of the boy who just wanted to make the world softer. But when he got to Nashville, no one quite knew what to do with him. His sound was too raw, his heart too open, his accent too Texan. Producers wanted polish, not poetry. They told him to shave, to wear suits, to smooth out his edges. For a while he tried. He cut his hair, wore the ties, and sang songs that didn't feel like him. Ironically, those very songs, Crazy, Hello Walls, Nightlife, became massive hits for other artists. Patsy Cline, Farron Young, and Ray Price took his words to the top of the charts, while Willie remained in the shadows. He was the invisible hand behind other people's success, watching his own truth slip further away with every song that wasn't his to sing. Frustrated and weary, Willie finally did something Nashville couldn't understand. He left, packed his car, drove back to Texas, and started again on his own terms. There, he found something that Nashville had lost, a place where the rules didn't matter, and music didn't need permission. Austin was wild, free, and alive with rebellion. It felt like home. When Willie stepped onto the stage at the Armadillo World headquarters, his long hair loose, his jeans worn, and his voice unfiltered, something electric happened. The crowd didn't see a man out of place. They saw truth. That night, Outlaw country was born. Willie wasn't following the industry anymore. He was leading a revolution of authenticity. The 1970s and 1980s turned Willie Nelson into more than a musician. He became a cultural force, a symbol of freedom, honesty, and defiance. Albums like Red-Headed Stranger, Stardust, and Always on My Mind redefined country music. His songs spoke to the dreamers, the broken-hearted, the wanderers. And yet, behind every note, there was a quiet sadness he never escaped. Each lyric he wrote carried a confession. Every melody was a memory wrapped in pain and redemption. He became the soundtrack of America's soul, but he himself rarely knew where home truly was. The open road was both a blessing and a curse. The roar of the crowd filled his nights, but the silence after was deafening. Tour after tour, city after city, Willie became a ghost in motion. He performed for millions, but belonged to no one. Between shows, he'd sit alone on his bus, Trigger at his side, staring out at the endless highway. The outlaw life that once symbolized freedom had become a cage he built himself, one lined with applause and loneliness. By the late 1980s, his personal world began to crumble. 4 failed marriages, strained family ties, and a mountain of regrets followed him like shadows he couldn't outrun. Then came the blow that nearly broke him: the IRS scandal. In 1990, the government claimed he owed over $30 million in back taxes. It was supposed to be the end. But Willie Nelson didn't break. He sang his way through it. He recorded Who'll Buy My Memories, a bare-bones collection of songs sold directly to his fans. The nation rallied around him, buying tapes, spreading love, and helping him pay off his debts. Through humility and grit, he did what only Willie could: turn ruin into redemption. That chapter changed him forever. He realized that fame could vanish overnight, but love, the real kind, came from truth and perseverance. Still, time was beginning to leave its marks. His hair grew whiter, his hands slower, his breath shorter. Even so, he kept playing, kept touring, kept carrying that Texas fire wherever the road led him. Then, in 2019, during his Outlaw Music Festival tour, Willie suddenly stopped mid-song. His voice cracked, his breathing faltered. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he walked off stage. Days later, he canceled the rest of his tour, citing breathing problems caused by emphysema. For the first time, the invincible Outlaw looked fragile. He downplayed it, told reporters he just needed rest, but those close to him knew the truth. The years had caught up. The road that once gave him life had started taking it back. Each breath was harder, each night longer. He'd survived heartbreak, loss, and scandal, but this time, it wasn't about endurance. It was about acceptance. At his ranch in Luck, Texas, Willie began to slow down. The place became his sanctuary, a quiet corner of the world where time seemed to pause. He spent mornings watching the sun rise over the fields, feeding his horses, and strumming his guitar under the same trees that shaded his youth. He was no longer chasing applause. He was chasing peace. His friends noticed the change. The endless tours became fewer, the rehearsals shorter. Between songs, he'd talk about old companions, Waylon Jennings, Merle Haggard, Johnny Cash. The names rolled off his tongue like prayer. "There used to be 10 of us," he said softly once. "Now it's just me." That loneliness sank deeper than any song. He missed them, not just as fellow artists, but as brothers. Together, they'd built an empire of rebellion. Now, he was the last outlaw standing. Each night he played felt like a farewell to their memory, a final tribute to a generation that had given everything to the road. "The hardest part of living this long," he said, "is watching everyone else go first." In time, he began to question what he was still chasing. Was it purpose, habit, or fear of silence? Deep down, Willie knew the answer. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of leaving his story unfinished. That's when he made a decision that shocked everyone. He would end it on his own terms, not with tragedy, but with grace. Sitting on his porch one golden afternoon, Trigger resting on his lap, he told a journalist, "I don't want to keep running from the end. I want to walk toward it." His voice was calm, steady, and certain. After all these years, the man who never stopped moving was finally learning to stand still. For decades, he had been the symbol of endurance, the cowboy who never quit. But now, even he could see that every trail runs out, eventually. The bandmates were gone, the laughter had faded, and the miles had taken their toll. It wasn't despair that filled him. It was peace, the kind that only comes from a life fully lived. His sons, Lucas and Micah, struggled to accept it. To them, music was their father's lifeblood. "The day he stops singing," Lucas once said, "is the day his heart stops beating." They begged him to keep performing, to stay on the stage a little longer. But Willie had already made peace with the silence waiting for him. He told them gently that knowing when to stop was part of the song. "If you play a tune too long," he said, "you start to lose what made it beautiful." For him, ending wasn't defeat. It was art. Every journey has a final verse, and forcing it beyond that would only dilute its truth. He began to see life itself as a melody, fragile, beautiful, and fleeting. Over the years, he'd lost pieces of himself, his voice, his strength, and sometimes even his memory. But what remained was the essence that made him timeless, the quiet honesty that turned pain into poetry. And now, He wanted to give that final note back to the earth. At Luck Ranch, Willie found a rhythm that fame could never offer. He spent quiet mornings watching the sky change colors, afternoons humming songs no one else would ever hear. His wife, Annie, said he'd finally found stillness, the one thing he'd been chasing his whole life. The outlaw had become the monk of his own peace. When he told his family he wanted to stop touring, they cried. But Willie only smiled. "I've sung everything I needed to say," he whispered, "and the rest of the song belongs to you." He wasn't quitting. He was passing the torch, leaving space for the next generation to sing their truth. Then came his final album, like a letter to time itself. Fans immediately sensed something different. The melodies were stripped back, the lyrics hauntingly tender. Every track felt like a goodbye wrapped in gratitude. Critics called it his most personal work, a love letter to life, loss, and the gentle art of letting go. When asked if it was his farewell, Willie only grinned. "We all reach the end of the set list eventually," he said. "I just want to end on the right note." That quiet humor, even in reflection, reminded everyone why they loved him. He wasn't running from death. He was dancing with it, one soft step at a time. He spoke openly about his beliefs, karma, forgiveness, and reincarnation. "Energy doesn't die," he said. "It just changes form." To him, death wasn't an ending, but a continuation, another song waiting to be played in a different key. That belief brought him calm. He wanted to leave this world with a clean heart, unburdened and at peace. His longtime harmonica player, Mickey Raphael, said, "He's not saying goodbye to us. He's saying goodbye to the part of him that the world owns." That line captured it perfectly. For decades, Willie had given himself to the public, to their joy, their grief, their stories. Now he was taking himself back. Those close to him describe him as more serene than ever. He laughs more, prays more, and cherishes small things: the sound of rain, a cup of coffee, the sight of horses grazing. To outsiders, it might look like slowing down. To Willie, it's the realest kind of living there is. Evenings at Luck are his favorite. The sun melts into the horizon as Willie, Lucas, and Micah sit under an old oak tree, guitars in hand. No cameras, no crowd, just the music, soft and honest. Sometimes, they don't speak for hours. The silence between them feels sacred, like the pause between verses that says more than words ever could. Visitors to the ranch describe a sense of eternity there. It's as if time bends around him, slowing to match his rhythm. Willie doesn't measure his life in awards or records anymore. He measures it in sunsets, laughter, and kindness, the three things he believes are eternal. "If that's all people remember about me," he said once, "that I tried to make the world a little kinder, then I did all right." It's a simple sentence, but it carries the weight of a lifetime. Every song he ever wrote, every note he ever sang, pointed back to that same truth. Now, as he walks barefoot across his ranch, tending to his horses, you can almost see him dissolving into the land. The earth and the man are the same, aged, scarred, but beautiful. Visitors say standing near him feels like reaching the end of a great story you never want to close. Willie knows the time is near, but he doesn't fear it. He looks at the horizon and smiles, saying, "The show doesn't stop when I go. It just plays a different tune somewhere else." That's the legacy of a man who turned every ending into a melody. At 91, he's no longer chasing immortality. He's already achieved it, in the laughter of his sons, in the hearts of his fans, in the wind that carries his songs across the plains. The legend of Willie Nelson isn't about fame. It's about freedom, kindness, and the courage to say goodbye with grace. And as the sun sets over Luck, Texas, his voice can still be heard, faint, steady, eternal. It's not a farewell, it's a benediction. The road, at last, has reached its quiet horizon, and the music gently fades into forever. In the weeks that followed his quiet announcement, tributes poured in from around the world. Musicians from every genre, from country legends to rock icons, spoke about what Willie meant to them. Some called him a mentor, others, a prophet. But nearly all agreed on one thing: there will never be another like him. He wasn't just part of American music, he was American music itself. Old friends like Dolly Parton and Chris Christopherson sent private messages, thanking him for the songs that had carried them through the storms of their own lives. Younger artists like Casey Musgraves, Chris Stapleton, and Sturgill Simpson said their careers were possible only because he'd paved the road they now walked. Willie listened, smiled, and said softly, "That's all I ever wanted, to leave the gate open behind me." One night, sitting under the porch light with Annie, he spoke about how strange it felt to outlive his heroes. "When I was young," he said, "I thought the hardest part of growing old would be the pain. Turns out it's the quiet." She reached for his hand, and for a long while, they said nothing. The stars above Luck, Texas, seemed to listen too. He began to write again, not for the charts, not for the crowds, but for himself. Poems about stillness, about returning to the earth, about gratitude. His handwriting had grown shaky, but the words were clearer than ever. He called the collection The Last Verse, though he joked that it might take him forever to finish. "I've been saying goodbye for 50 years, he laughed. "Guess I just like long exits." Around this time, a film crew approached him, asking to make a final documentary about his life. He agreed, but only on one condition: no script, no retakes, no polish. "If you're gonna show me," he said, "show the wrinkles, the pauses, the forgetting. That's the truth of me now." The result was raw and intimate, a portrait of a man unafraid to be ordinary after a lifetime of being myth. The cameras captured him doing the simplest things: feeding his horses, tuning his battered guitar, laughing at an old joke he'd told 1,000 times. At one point, he looked straight into the lens and said, "We spend so much time trying to be remembered, but it's the forgetting that sets us free." That line left even the crew silent. His health continued to waver, but his spirit didn't. Friends say that even on rough mornings, when his breathing came hard, he'd hum softly to himself. Sometimes it was Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Other times it was something new, something wordless, a private song between him and the wind. He said he liked to think of it as a rehearsal for heaven. When spring came, the wildflowers returned to the hills around his ranch, painting the land in gold and crimson. Willie spent hours outside, sitting beneath the same oak tree where he'd written so many of his songs. The birds would gather near him, drawn by the low hum of his voice. "They think I'm one of them," he joked to Annie. "Guess I finally found my band." Meanwhile, across the world, fans gathered for impromptu vigils, playing his records, lighting candles, sharing stories of what his music had meant to them. A truck driver from Kansas recalled listening to On the Road Again through every mile of his 30-year career. A widow from Georgia said Always on My Mind was the only song that could make her husband's memory feel alive again. Willie's legacy had become a kind of shared heartbeat. As his 92nd birthday approached, his family planned a small gathering at the ranch. No press, no fanfare, just loved ones, laughter, and a few guitars. They sang together deep into the night. When it was Willie's turn, he didn't choose a famous hit. Instead, he sang a song no one had ever heard before, a soft, unfinished tune that faded into the sound of crickets and wind. When he stopped, there was no applause, only tears and silence. The next morning, Lucas found a note left on the kitchen table. It wasn't a will or a letter, but a poem. It read, "Every song ends, but the silence that follows isn't empty, it's just the echo of something true." No one knew when he'd written it, but it felt like the final verse he'd been waiting for. In the months that followed, he spent most of his days by the window, looking out at the fields. Sometimes he'd whisper a few lines from old songs, his voice barely a breath. Other times, he'd laugh out loud at something only he could hear. "They're tuning up for me," he'd say with a wink. Whether he meant angels or bandmates, no one asked. He began giving away possessions, old hats, boots, instruments, to friends and neighbors. "These things have had a good run," he said. "Now they need new stories." When someone tried to refuse, he'd grin and say, "Don't make me outlive my stuff." Even in his final months, humor stayed his constant companion. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Willie asked Lucas to bring Trigger outside. The guitar's wood was worn thin, its surface carved with decades of memories. He strummed a few chords, his hands trembling slightly. "She's tired too," he said quietly. Then he played one last tune, slow and pure, the sound drifting out across the Texas plains like a prayer. Afterward, he sat back, gazing at the horizon. "You hear that?" he whispered. Lucas listened, hearing nothing but the wind. "That's it," Willie said with a smile. The world singing back. It was a moment so gentle, so vast, that Lucas would remember it for the rest of his life. In early summer, Willie quietly retreated from public view. There were no farewell tours, no grand finales, just soft mornings, quiet laughter, and the steady rhythm of his breath blending with the hum of the ranch. When the inevitable day came, it came as gently as a song ending mid-note. The world didn't erupt in shock. It fell silent, as though even the wind knew to bow its head. News spread like dawn, slow, luminous, and full of ache. Across radio stations, his voice filled the air once more. DJs played "On the Road Again," "Angel Flying Too Close to the Ground," and "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain." It felt less like mourning and more like communion. Millions of people singing along to the same man who had taught them how to live, love, and let go. At Luck Ranch, the family held a private memorial. There were no speeches, no headlines, only songs. Trigger rested beside his favorite chair, surrounded by wildflowers. As the evening sky turned to gold, Lucas spoke softly. He didn't just write songs. He wrote the truth about being human, and in that moment, even the silence seemed to agree. That night, fans around the world lit candles, guitars, and even campfires, creating what became known as the Night of a Million Songs. From Austin to Tokyo, people sang together, their voices blending in a single melody that rose toward the stars. For a man who spent his life connecting souls through music, it was the perfect encore. Some say you can still hear him out there on quiet Texas nights, a faint strum carried by the breeze, a whisper that sounds like laughter. Maybe it's imagination, maybe it's memory. Or maybe, as Willie himself once said, songs never die. They just change singers. And so, under the vast sky he loved, the outlaw rests, not in silence, but in rhythm. The road didn't end after all. It simply turned into something eternal. The last note fades, the stars shimmer, and somewhere out there, Willie Nelson is still singing, soft, steady, and forever on the road again.